In the year 2012, successful businessman Andrew Bush finally found love with a young, beautiful woman. However, as the months passed by, he realized that his new lover was becoming controlling, manipulative, and obsessive. What followed was a turbulent breakup with a strange woman who refused to let him go. Ultimately, for Andrew, all of this would end in the worst kind of tragedy, a tragedy that would barely be repaid in the eyes of the law. But who was Mayka Kukucova? Why was she unable to let go of Andrew Bush? And what happened to her next? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the disturbing case of Mayka Kukucova. If you're new to this channel, I post true crime and strange cases here on a weekly basis, so if that does sound like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Mayka Kukucova. Now, here's a new location on the Coffeehouse crime map. Welcome to Costa del Sol, folks. Now, many of us have already heard of this popular holiday destination, though instead of murder, it's better known for its balmy beaches, beautifully historic Mediterranean towns, and rugged national parks. Located near the southern edge of Spain, you'd be hard done by to find rain and paradise like this. With that said, it is very clear to see why this part of the country brings in more than 13 million visitors each year. Never too hot, yet barely ever too cold. Costa del Sol settles at around 15 degrees Celsius or 59 Fahrenheit in the winter, and reaches 29 degrees Celsius or 84 Fahrenheit in the summer. The area consists of dozens of coastal towns and communities spread along the coastline, all of which keep a steady watch of the Alboran Sea. Summertime sun and gorgeous blue skies aside, modern shopping malls, quaint roads, sandy beaches, and breathtaking vantage points provide a world of interest and entertainment. And when you've finished exploring paradise for the day, the world-famous Spanish cuisine awaits. Now, everyone tends to think of paella, but personally speaking, you would likely catch me necking traditional Spanish donuts and margaritas instead. Like much of southern Europe, Costa del Sol has been inhabited for many centuries, and has been home to the Romans, the Byzantines, the Muslim Taifa of Malaga, and eventually the Catholics too. Since the 1950s and beyond, it has turned into one of Spain's most renowned tourist destinations. In fact, more than 15 billion euros of holidaymakers' money was spent here in 2014 alone, which, to be honest, is no surprise at all. One of those more affluent tourists went by the name of Andrew Bush, and interestingly, Andrew wasn't your typical visitor. He was a multi-millionaire who owned a gorgeous small mansion in the region. However, before we get to what generated such wealth, let's talk about the man himself. Andrew Bush was a British citizen born and raised in the United Kingdom. Born in October 1965, he was 48 years old at the time this story took place, in the year 2014. Now, Andrew was a very successful businessman. From what I could find online, he remained the director of his business for 13 long years. Company documentation states that he resigned in April 2014, though you will soon find out that to not technically be the case. Slightly perplexing side note, but his company was listed as dormant with all net assets equating to £1, which is slightly odd considering all of the money he seemed to have, so I'm not sure if something shady was going on here or not. Anyway, in stark contrast to his company's woeful accounts, Andrew really did live a life of wealth and success. He owned many luxury cars, all of which he kept parked in a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom mansion located in Pulmerich in Wales. Funny nickname, but Andrew was known as the King of Bling, and this was for a very good reason too. The businessman was a jeweler, having launched Andrew David's Jewelers several years prior, what is known today as the company Gold Trader. He owned various other businesses too, this including a pawnbroker, a beauty salon, and a luxury car and limousine hire company. Andrew was described by people around him as a good man and a good neighbor. Now, not much is known about him as a person, but he was said to be an excellent leader that, at times, had a quite forceful personality. He had confidence, and quite distinctly, a clear presence in any room. In the mid-90s, he married Samantha Mason, who at the time was a local news presenter. The two had a daughter named Ellie, though sadly split up a few years after her birth. Despite this, the couple remained amicable, and Andrew was said to adore his daughter, who, now aged 19, worked for him part-time. Andrew's business mindset helped feed his ostentatious taste for champagne and expensive cars. He owned a red convertible Ferrari and a grey Lamborghini, and at one stage he had a Bentley too. However, it was over in Costa del Sol that he kept the real ultimate man's toy, a top-of-the-range Hummer vehicle. Not that this was the only thing he had in Spain, because to house and protect it was Andrew's mansion, which he named Mar Antica. The mansion's located only 2 minutes away from one of Costa del Sol's beautiful beaches. Sadly, Google Maps hasn't travelled down this road since 2011, so you can only see a view of the mansion in the early stages of its renovation. However, images taken later would prove it to be a very grand home. Andrew would visit this place roughly 4 times a year. It sported 5 bedrooms, had a large inviting pool, and even an egg chair that overlooked the garden. Sports cars were stored in the driveway, which of course is where he often kept his beloved Hummer truck along with his red convertible Lotus. To complement this rather opulent lifestyle, Andrew had a rather indulgent taste in women. You see, he liked them to be around half his age, and was seen as quite a player. The word misogynist has been thrown around in quite a lot of the old reports, though I can't seem to find out why. And really, this is more of an opinion than a fact. In the winter of 2011, Andrew began to grow close to one of his colleagues who he employed in the jewellery store, and this colleague is very important to our case today. With long hair, a height of 5'5", and an age barely half his own, this blonde bombshell was a serious distraction to him, and her name was Mayka Kukucova. Born on May 25th, 1990, she was 24 years old at the time this story takes place. She spent most of her life growing up in the small Slovakian town of Nova Besocha. With no economy or local businesses, the town's population has been dwindling in recent decades. Just over 1,000 residents currently live here, and so you can likely imagine how any kid may have viewed this place. Her classmates remember Mayka as a popular and pretty woman. She always wanted to be the centre of attention and attracted the hopeful hearts of many of her male classmates. Mayka's parents were earnest and hard-working folks. Not much is known about her father, but her mother was a manager for a local building society. Moving into her adult years, Mayka was sick of her hometown and desperately wanted to leave. And recognizing that she had a distinct air of physical attraction, she wanted to break into modelling. Over the course of 2 years, and while dating a man named Peter, the pair saved what money and courage they could to move to the charming city of Bristol, England. They moved with the promise of photo modelling work. However, when they got there, things didn't quite go to plan. Their modelling careers either made marginal gains or failed, which led to both of them becoming broke rather quickly. To supplement her income, Mayka started working part-time jobs in the city, where she became a chef, a store clerk, and eventually a helper in Andrew's shop. And this is where she would cross paths with Andrew Bush. Entering one of his stores for work, her beauty seemed to do the trick, because after having an interview with him, he hired her to work in Gold Trader. Andrew seemed to like Mayka for a cute and innocent personality, and as for Mayka, well, she thought very highly of him too, as he was wise and wealthy after all. As you can likely guess, the two eventually fell in love. However, there was one problem to all of this. Peter was still in the picture. And what do you think Mayka did with him? Well, she dropped his ass like a sack of potatoes. And so, thus began a passionate, luxurious, and strange relationship between Mayka and Andrew. And over the next 2.5 years, they would have a lot of fun. Images taken by the two portrayed the lives of a very fortunate couple. They took photos in front of expensive cars, on lavish holidays, and in fancy clothes. Life seemed to be pretty peachy. However, behind the scenes, their relationship started to break down relatively quickly. With Mayka more than half his age, she was a different generation when it came to energy and maturity. Where she wanted to go out drinking, go to parties, and have a more extroverted type of fun, Andrew was always tired from the relentless work he was putting in. As you can likely imagine, this ultimately created a rift between the two, and cracks began to form. Now, in addition to all of this, Mayka was beginning to become rather ungrateful. She wanted to buy very expensive clothes and jewellery. However, since she was theoretically broke, it meant she'd have to use Andrew's money instead. Andrew clocked onto this and grew quite frustrated with her spending habits, though foolishly she failed to slow down. Now, this is probably the icing on the cake, but to add to the list of concerns, Mayka was growing obsessive with her partner. She wanted to know where he was at all times of the day, often stepped over boundaries with his friendships, and even tried to see him every passing moment of the day. Mayka was always worried about Andrew with other women, and apparently he couldn't even leave the shop to grab a cup of coffee without her following him. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, going out for coffee is sacred time. To me, that's Adrian time, and let me tell you, nobody gets in the way of that. There was one time while in Dubai, Mayka threw into a raging tantrum at Andrew when he told her that she couldn't buy a new handbag. She actually ended up throwing the old one in his face, and even stamped on his laptop. And this is where the real red flags start to roll in. But she actually became so jealous of Andrew's daughter that she removed all family photos from his home, replacing them with photos of her own face. Her jealousy and attention-seeking went so far that, one day after an argument, she handcuffed herself to the bed while Andrew was out, before calling him and the police. Mayka claimed that she'd been overpowered during a robbery, and one of those things that had been taken was Andrew's passport, thus preventing him to go to the Middle East on business. As you can likely guess, all of this was too much for Andrew, and eventually he broke things off with the young woman. Mayka had become too unpredictable, too greedy, and too problematic. Now, sadly, Mayka did not take the breakup very well, and instead she became even more obsessed with him. And although she eventually moved back to Nova Pasacha to live with Peter, she still kept a close eye on Andrew. You heard me right, by the way, I did say move back in with Peter. The man took her back with open arms, and incredibly, the two started dating almost immediately. In the meanwhile, she began to stalk Andrew online. While the two were still together, she had discreetly installed the app Find My Friends on his phone, this allowing her to watch his location at all times of the day. Andrew had absolutely no privacy. And even worse, he wasn't aware of it at all. To sum up the current situation, Mayka was in disbelief that the relationship had ended. She still messaged Andrew daily, begging him to take her back. It became quite clear that she believed that both were destined to be together. Friends warned Andrew not to take her back. They claimed that she was crazy, some even referring to her as a psycho ex. For those that know, real Jodi Arias vibes right here. Thankfully, he didn't, but that wouldn't stop Mayka from posting videos of herself online, begging for Andrew to take her back. She made several video montages filled with pictures of them with quotes such as, "Love is communication, us is crazy." She also implored Andrew to forget everything bad, saying, "Days without you don't have meaning." And "Let's be together forever," while Celine Dion played in the background. Andrew ignored all of these videos. Besides, he had found a new love anyway. Maria Kurotaeva was even younger than Mayka, and at the age of 20, she was 29 years younger than he was. The relationship between Andrew and Maria seemed to be a lot more stable, and the couple even had plans to move to London after she had finished her degree. Maria was a Russian-born singer and writer who also owned a small property business. However, what life was actually like between the two, we will unfortunately never really know, as only a few months later, everything would change forever. April 2014. While stalking her ex-boyfriend through social media, Mayka realized that he and Maria were preparing to go to his mansion in Costa del Sol. The two were not expected to arrive for a few more days, and so Mayka concocted a plan. Unknown to Andrew, but she had cut copies of the keys to his mansion before the two broke up, and with him unaware of this, she would have the element of surprise on her side. On April 2nd, 2014, Mayka traveled to Dubnica Airport in Slovakia before boarding a flight to Malaga Costa del Sol. After arriving, she took a taxi to Andrew's mansion, let herself in, and waited for him to arrive. She stayed in her pajamas, lounged around the house, and slept in his bed for 2 whole days. When finally, just after midnight on April 5th, 2014, Andrew and Maria had finally made it home. They had spent the evening by the coast after their flight, and unknown to Mayka at the time, but Andrew had even asked Maria to marry him. As soon as Andrew turned on the lights to the main entrance, his fiancée sensed that something was terribly wrong. Women's underwear was hanging on a clothesline near the front door. A suitcase was found on the floor, and several pairs of high heels were sprawled nearby. The two heard a shuffle. And that is when they saw her. Peering up at the top of the stairs, they saw Mayka standing still, looking down at them. Maria screamed. She ran out of the house as fast as possible and into the Hummer truck. Closing the door behind her, she locked the vehicle. After a few minutes, Andrew calmly walked outside. He said that everything was okay, but if she could please call the police and ask them to come quickly. Now, unfortunately, Maria's phone was dead. However, with full confidence that Andrew could fix the problem without the authorities, she sat tight and waited. Maria sat there for several minutes, waiting for her partner to return in the dead of the night. However, that is when she heard 3 gunshots ring out. After a few seconds of silence, 2 screams followed by multiple loud bangs. Maria could only imagine it was a suitcase or something of similar weight and shape. Watching the entrance to the house, one lone figure appeared. It was Mayka, and after closing and locking the door behind her, she started walking directly towards Maria and the Hummer truck. As she approached the driver's door, Mayka gently told Maria to get out of the truck. Apparently, Andrew had said to her that she could use it to get to the airport. What was odd is that Mayka appeared to be very calm and collected, which made Maria feel very uneasy. And after getting into the Hummer truck, she drove off into the distance. With Mayka gone and no sign of Andrew, Maria was petrified about what may have just happened. She ran to the front door to check on her fiancé, however, it had been shut and locked. Using an external socket found in the garden, she then charged her phone long enough to call the police. However, it would take a few hours for them to arrive. Disappointingly, Maria had to walk up the main road to find responding officers, as strangely, the police could not find where the villa was located. It then took fire services another 2 hours to find the house, and after finally scaling the walls and breaking in, they found the motionless body of Andrew. He had been shot 3 times. 1 wound to the arm, and 2 to the head. A .38 revolver was found at the scene, planted in Andrew's hand in a haphazard attempt to make it look like he had shot himself. However, with Maria being witness to the night's events, that was going to prove very hard to believe. Since she already knew who Mayka was, the authorities were able to release an arrest warrant rather swiftly. But, as mentioned before, that was after they'd already lost several hours. She had fled using Andrew's Hummer truck, which meant that, theoretically, she should easily be identified. However, with an engine so beefy, it also highlighted that she may have already covered serious ground. And so, with that in mind, an international arrest warrant was released. The authorities of Spain, Portugal, France, and beyond were notified, and as you can likely guess, this story made international headlines. Here in the United Kingdom, the news of Mr. Bling's death brought both shock and intrigue. In the meanwhile, Spain was dealing with an active crime scene, and rumours and whispers began to circulate back in Slovakia. Maria was kept under the watchful eye of investigators. Andrew's homes were put on lockdown, and his family began to process their devastating loss. And as all of this was happening, Mayka's silence lingered on. Unknown to everyone else at the time, but Mayka had actually spent the last 3 days travelling 3,000 kilometers or 2,000 miles all the way back home to Slovakia. Now, she actually abandoned the Hummer truck only 2 miles away from Andrew's mansion before calling Peter for help. And after being told about, well, everything that was going on, Peter then turned full simp mode for Mayka. He flew over to Spain, hired out a rental car, and then drove her 2,000 miles back home. Although her parents initially denied it to officers, they were actually keeping in contact with her throughout those 3 days. But I guess she realised how doomed she actually was, because after getting home and hugging her parents, she decided to hand herself in to the authorities. The entire trip was pointless though, because after driving 3 days in one direction, she was then shipped all the way back to Costa del Sol, where she remained behind bars for her trial. If you thought the story was over, you are mistaken, because Mayka wouldn't go down with a clean conscience. At first, she claimed that she was pregnant with Andrew's child and travelled to Spain to tell him. But after arriving at the property, Andrew allegedly flew into a fit of rage. Apparently, the murder was an accident. She claimed that Andrew had pulled out a gun, aimed it at her face, and then said, "This is where everything ends." But after pulling the trigger, the gun apparently failed to fire. Mayka claimed that she then threw herself at him, thus causing a physical fight between the two. She further claimed that after pulling the weapon off Andrew, it suddenly went off, which deafened her. She then tried to run up the stairs to get away, but he grabbed her legs. To quote Mayka's testimony, "I didn't realize I still had the gun in my hand. I didn't know what happened, but I managed to get upstairs and then there was silence. And when I went back downstairs, he was lying on the ground." Moving into the legal proceedings of this case, the judge would not believe her story. Maybe if it were not so unbelievable, then she would have had a fighting chance at claiming it was self-defense. However, as you and I and everyone else can see, there were too many holes in her story. To begin with, Mayka's pregnancy was a complete fabrication. She was never pregnant with Andrew's child, which therefore eliminated the suggestive motive. In addition to this, claiming that she couldn't remember taking 3 shots at Andrew is very hard to believe. Honestly, the sheer audacity of this woman is quite remarkable. Mayka was also unable to explain how Andrew's body was so far away from the stairs, where she claimed that apparently he had grabbed her by the legs after getting shot. And as for the gun she'd placed in his hand to make it look like he'd taken his own life, yeah chief, try explaining not 1 but 2 shots to the head. If all of this wasn't enough already, the gun was also proven to be illegally sold to Mayka, with the weapon's serial number scratched off. It's probably no surprise that Mayka Kukucova was found guilty in this story. The judge in her original trial expressed his belief that she had acted in a passionate state of mind. And so, in May 2016, she was sentenced to only 15 years behind bars after 5 days of deliberation. In addition to her sentence, the court ordered Mayka and her family to pay €200,000 to Andrew's family, the equivalent of $219,000 or £176,000. It was learned that, due to these legal bills, Mayka's parents were forced to sell their home in order to help keep their daughter afloat. Now, 2 wrongs don't make a right, but the move was likely a requirement anyway. Due to their daughter's actions, the residents of their town essentially exiled them, and almost everyone refused to acknowledge their existence due to the actions Mayka had committed. To say that Mayka had it easy in prison is a complete understatement. Her legal bills were paid by her parents. She learned new languages behind bars, taught other prisoners English, and even had special access to the prison's swimming pool. And unfortunately, her easy ride did not stop there. Although her original sentence was 15 years, which by the way is already a pitiful amount for a murderer, this was then further reduced to 13. When judges ruled that they unnecessarily imprisoned her for breaking into Andrew's holiday home, they knocked 2 years off her sentence. But sadly, the story gets even worse, as after only 8 years behind bars for the murder of another human being, Mayka Kukucova was released back into the free world. Since then, she hasn't wasted any time in living life to the max. And although she is theoretically on parole, meaning she cannot leave the country, being forced to spend a few years in a Mediterranean paradise doesn't sound like the most grueling punishment. Mayka has since returned to social media, including apps like Instagram and TikTok, to flaunt her bikini body on camera. It is also reported that, apparently, she has been pampering herself with beauty treatments, all while failing to pay compensation to Andrew's family. People have seen her at the gym, in nightclubs, and even at beach clubs. Lying on sunbeds, taking sheepish selfies by the coast, and sprawling on the beach. Nobody would assume this woman, often posing as if she were a model, was actually a stone-cold killer, a murderer who ultimately snatched the life of a hard-working and successful businessman. Now, Andrew Bush may have potentially had a problematic habit of dating younger women. And with this, unfortunately, the lack of maturity often comes with the territory. Either way, he never deserved to find himself intertwined with an obsessive, controlling psychopath. Now, Andrew seemed to have accomplished many things with his life, but his personality did not end with his job. He was charismatic, friendly, determined, and strong. He maintained a good friendship with his ex-wife, and was well loved by his daughter, both of these women who now miss him dearly. It is believed that Mayka has set up home near the city of Seville, where she will serve the remaining years of her sentence as a free woman. It's quite disgraceful when you think about it. If she had any remorse at all, then she would be paying back her legal obligations. However, she hasn't paid a single penny to Andrew's family, and instead has been flaunting herself on holiday. Anyway, we don't actually know what she thinks or believes, because so far she's rejected every news media interview, saying that they have to pay her more if they want to hear her story. Honestly, I feel so sorry for Maria and Andrew's family. I feel the same way they do in this case, that the justice system has failed them and allowed a remorseless killer to roam free. Now, the Spanish system does tend to be rather sporadic when it comes to sentencing. However, in Mayka's case, many claim that maybe she got away with it because she has a pretty face. I find this story very similar to that of Jodi Arias, and in this case, I think it should have received a sentence just as harsh. Though I guess different story, different rules. Anyway folks, I think that just about wraps up our case today. Thank you so much for being here for another video by Coffeehouse Crime. I really do appreciate it. So, what do you think about this case? Do you think that Mayka should have got longer behind bars? And why do you think she was released so early? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you haven't yet, and please consider subscribing for free, it really does help me out. Just a quick reminder that I'm currently giving away 2 free coffee machines, so if you'd like to check that out, please visit my social media. You can find me at Coffeehouse Crime on Instagram or Facebook, or at CoffeeHCrime on Twitter. Anyway folks, I think that just about does it. Thank you again for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.